I don't think anyone can understand war without being in a war. I didn't feel mentally prepared for it at all because we didn't really fully understand what we were going out there to do. We were entering into the modern day Vietnam, effectively. I deployed to Afghanistan in October 07 to April 08 on Herrick 7. We were told we were just going to be going and guarding Bastion, which was a big base in the middle of the desert. But then when we got out there, things changed and we were redeployed to other more kinetic areas. How it was being portrayed back home was very much about the war on terrorism and that nobody was safe from, the Taliban and September the 11th. And we were very much told that we were going out there to make a difference to the world and make it a safer place. But despite being out there for years and nearly 800 casualties, it would ultimately be a waste of time. It very much disillusioned me with the country. I realised how much capitalism plays within wars. Effectively, it was all about money and oil and following America into wars we should never have been in. The locals definitely don't benefit. Governments can benefit and arms manufacturing companies can increase their underlying profit line. So it just made me realise how much the world is ruled by capitalism and selfish people that are trying to benefit themselves at the expense of others. Long-term psychological effects on my mental health have been fairly severe. I was diagnosed, like a lot of people, with PTSD. I think the attitude of some of the people I went out there with, they talked about the Afghan nationals as flip-flops or ragheads, which is what they would call the Taliban. You'd quite often hear build-up training about let's go slot ragheads and terminology like that. If you have one person that's speaking like that that's quite dominant, then, other people emulate that because they don't want to stand out. I don't think the army attracts right-wing people. I think it nurtures and grows people into being right-wing. The soldiers that are there on the front line are very often recruited from poor and deprived areas of, Liverpool, Manchester, Commonwealth countries and things like that. And very often they're escaping a life that they don't want to be in, whether that's a poor family life, whether that's care, whether that's abusive relationships with parents or destructive behaviours. So they're very malleable when they enter the army, and part of the training is to break them down and rebuild them. It was very disorganised. We were issued with shorts and t-shirts for a winter tour. When we got out there, we didn't have enough body armour plates for our body armour, so we had the choice to put either a plate in the front or a plate in the back. A lot of people were buying their own kit because the kit that we were issued was substandard at the time. There were people living in ditches for 4 months wearing boots with carrier bags wrapped around them because they weren't waterproof. A lot of the hierarchy didn't really, certainly from a platoon level, know what was going on. At one point, we were tasked with going out and doing mine checks for warriors, which is just bizarre. Why would infantry soldiers be clearing IEDs for tanks? Picked up one guy, trod on an IED and gone 17 foot in the air and landed in a 10-foot hole. So even forgetting the mine injuries, had fallen 27 foot. You're never going to win against a force that doesn't wear uniforms, that plants IEDs, and a militia. They know the ground far better than us. How would you ever know whether they were Taliban or whether they were just local villagers and farmers? I knew it would be futile when we went into a village and the local villagers sat us down and made us feel welcome and made us tea and were very hospitable. And then when we got a mile outside of the village, effectively the same villagers opened fire on us because when we were in the village, we were their guests. When we were outside, we were effectively their enemy. We did very little to invest in the infrastructure of the country. They still didn't have a stable economy. There was still a lot of corruption. The Poverty Eradication Force, for 7 years, I think America spent $15 billion trying to stop farmers growing opium, and then they withdrew the funding. So they just all went back to growing opium, and they made it, 10 times worse. It gave a false hope that we were making a difference out there. You couldn't really measure whether the war on global terrorism was working, but what you could measure is whether they were holding legal elections, whether opium was, decreasing, whether the infrastructure was being built. But when I met the Poverty Eradication Force, they just struck me as cowboys. They would have these helicopters that would land in Bastion that nobody was allowed near, which I assume were part of the CIA. The more we interfered with the system and the more we tried to stop it, the more we made it worse. I think it's very weird, modern warfare, because the days of lining your troops up on horseback and charging into face-to-face combat has largely finished. I mean, you are massively detached. So now you're shooting into bushes 300-400 meters away. You're shooting into compounds. It's very difficult to know whether you're the person that shot the Taliban or whether it's the person next to you that was also firing, or whether it's the Apache hovering above. So when we heard that Afghanistan had fallen back in the hands of the Taliban, I think it didn't come as much of a surprise. For a number of years, a lot of people had realised that it wasn't really going anywhere. I don't think I know anyone that was out on my tour who isn't impacted in some way, whether that's with self-medicating with substances or alcohol abuse or failed marriages. I think what's difficult to know is whether they were damaged before entering the army and would have ended up there anyway, or whether the army made that worse or accelerated that. For myself, I still have hypervigilance. We'll walk into a pub and see absolutely everyone. I'll see the guy who looks like he's going to kick off for tattoos. I'll see the couple that have an argument at the end of the bar. I think for a time I self-medicated with drugs and alcohol because that was the way to escape it, I guess.